My name is Ranger Elias Danner, and I've worked for the U.S. Forest Service for 14 years. I'm stationed at Hargrave National Forest, a remote tract of mixed hardwood and pine spread across western Montana, where cell reception dies about 15 miles past the ranger gate. I'm one of the few permanent rangers here. Most of the crew are seasonal hires, college kids looking for field experience, or retirees volunteering for campground maintenance. I live here, round at Station 12, a squat cedar structure set against the slope of Black Elk Ridge. From the front porch, I can see the tree line ripple down like a dark green ocean. It's peaceful in the daylight. At night, though, I don't think I've ever truly felt comfortable out there. There's a saying among older rangers: the woods change after dark. When I started, I thought it was just their way of scaring rookies, the same way firefighters haze probies or pilots tease first-time flyers. But after years of patrolling alone through miles of empty forest, I've come to realize they weren't being poetic. They were stating a simple truth. The forest doesn't sleep. It just rearranges itself. That morning began like any other. Clear sky, cool air, sun cutting through the fog like gold threads. I brewed coffee, logged the overnight temperature, and radioed in to headquarters that Station 12 was operational. My assignment for the day was simple: inspect fire rings along the eastern loop of Whitetail Trail, check for illegal campsites, and replace a few damaged signs. No storms forecasted, no rescue calls pending. The kind of shift I'd once called quiet. By 7, I had the truck loaded with supplies: water jugs, first aid kit, trail markers, a shovel, and a spare chainsaw. I locked up the cabin and started down the gravel road, tires crunching over frost. The forest smelled sharp and clean, pine sap and cold stone. I parked near mile marker 18, where the service road narrowed to a dirt path, and continued on foot. Whitetail Trail winds through a series of ridges before dropping into a valley that catches almost no sun, even at noon. The locals call that area the Bull. It's beautiful but eerie, quiet in a way that presses against your ears. Around 10, I found the first issue, a fire ring still smoldering beside the creek. Whoever camped there had left half, burned cans, and an empty fifth of bourbon. I doused the coals, bagged the trash, and wrote up a violation note. Probably a pair of weekend drunks from town. Nothing unusual. The second thing wasn't on the map. About a mile downstream, I spotted something pale in the brush. A flash of color where it shouldn't be. I pushed through the ferns and found a new trail, narrow and rough, cutting uphill through young birch. It wasn't marked, and the ground looked freshly disturbed. Boot prints, tire treads. Someone had been hauling gear. Illegal hunters, maybe, or surveyors working without permit. Either way, it was my job to check. The slope was steep enough that my calves burned by the time I reached the top. The path ended at a clearing that shouldn't have existed. Trees felled in a rough square, stumps raw and bleeding sap. In the middle stood a pile of cut branches arranged like a lean-to, half collapsed. A fire pit sat beside it, ashes cold. Whoever built it hadn't been gone long. I could still smell smoke. I took photos for the report, collected a few shell casings, and left a bright orange notice of violation on a nearby log. That's when I noticed the silence. Every ranger learns to read the forest soundscape. The insect hum, the chatter of jays, the crackle of wind through needles. It tells you if everything's normal. In that clearing, the air was blank. Not quiet, but hollow. My ears popped like I'd changed altitude. Then came a sound so faint I almost missed it, a soft tap, 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 irregular like a stick against wood. I turned, scanning the trees. Nothing. I waited a full minute before forcing myself to walk back down the hill. By the time I reached the main trail, sunlight had thinned into gray. Clouds were moving in fast, and the temperature dropped. I glanced at my watch. Barely 1 in the afternoon. That unsettled me more than the noise had. This part of the forest didn't usually lose light so early. I hiked another mile before stopping for lunch beside the creek. While I ate, I heard distant movement upriver. Branches cracking, water sloshing. A black bear, most likely. Still, I packed up quicker than usual. The unease had settled behind my ribs, dull but steady. By 3, I decided to loop back toward the truck. I radioed HQ to confirm status. No response. The ridge often interfered with signal, so I tried again from higher ground. Still nothing. I noted it for the report and continued. That was when the woods began to feel different. I can't explain it except to say the light went wrong. It didn't darken the way evening usually does. It just shifted. The shadows grew longer without any real sunset, stretching in directions that didn't match the slope. Trees looked closer together, angles subtly off. I told myself it was fatigue, maybe low blood sugar, maybe my eyes adjusting too slowly to the overcast. But part of me recognized the old ranger saying creeping back, the woods change after dark. At 40:10 p.m., the first radio crackle came through, fragmented words buried in statical. In miles, station, repeat. I responded immediately. Station 12, copy. This is Danner. I'm on Whitetail Trail, mile 18. Signals poor, nothing but white noise. Then, faintly, sunset before. The rest vanished. I checked the battery pack, swapped frequencies, tried again. No luck. The forest swallowed the sound. I kept walking, faster now. The trail looked unfamiliar though. I'd patrolled it dozens of times. Landmarks were wrong. Rocks where none should be. Turns sharper, trees leaning closer. Once, I caught sight of a blaze mark. My own paint from spring maintenance. But it appeared on the opposite side of the trunk, facing the wrong direction. It shouldn't have been possible. Still, everything could be explained: magnetic compass, drift, faulty memory, stress. I repeated those reasons out loud, just to hear a voice. It helped for a while. At dusk, the fog rolled in, thick and low, like smoke hugging the ground. The forest turned silver gray, the kind of light that tricks your eyes into seeing movement. My boots crunched over damp leaves, and each step sounded louder than it should have. Around 6, I reached a small wooden bridge crossing the creek. Except the bridge looked different. The handrails were newer, bolts shiny, planks unstained. We'd replaced this bridge 5 years ago, and the replacement had darkened from weather by now. This one looked freshly built. Maybe someone had done repairs without reporting it. Maybe I'd wandered farther than I thought. I crossed anyway. The wood creaked sharply under my weight, echoing off the water like a rifle crack. On the other side, the fog thickened until I could barely see 5 feet ahead. I followed the sound of the creek until I found a narrow bend. And there, in the mud, were fresh tracks, boot prints again. Deep, wide stride, maybe 2 people heading upstream. I crouched, touching the edge of one print. The soil was still damp but not collapsing, meaning they'd passed less than an hour ago. I called out, "Forest Service? Identify yourself." No answer, just the creek gurgling. I tried again, louder. "This is a restricted zone. Step out where I can see you." Silence. Then a splash upstream. I drew my flashlight and aimed toward the noise. The beam caught nothing but fog. I waited a long minute before moving closer. My pulse thudded so hard I could feel it in my throat. Every step forward made the air feel heavier, like breathing through wet cloth. When I reached the bend, the creek split into 2 forks. Both shallow, both lined with reeds. One of them had an old ranger marker post, metal, rusted, leaning half submerged. I knew that sign. We'd pulled it out years ago during restoration. So why was it back here? I stood there too long, trying to make sense of it. Eventually, I checked my watch again. 7:22 p.m. The day had slipped past faster than I realized. I needed to return before full dark, especially with no radio contact. The hike back was slow. The fog reflected my flashlight beam in blinding halos, and every tree looked like the next. I followed the compass, trusting the bearing. But when I finally broke through to the gravel road, my truck wasn't there. I stopped, breathing hard, scanning both directions. The road looked right. Same incline, same ditch, but the truck was gone. Just tire marks in the mud where it had been parked that morning. I checked my keys twice, as if the truck might reappear by logic alone. Then I noticed another set of tracks, beside mine heavy treads from a different vehicle. Maybe a service pickup, maybe locals with four-wheelers. Either way, they'd driven off the same way I came in. I walked for nearly half an hour before spotting light through the trees. A dim glow like a lantern. My relief faded when I realized it wasn't from a cabin or another ranger. It was firelight. Someone had built a camp along the roadside. I approached quietly, hand near the bear spray on my belt. The site was rough, messy. Same type of setup I'd found earlier on the hill. Inside the circle of firelight were 2 folding chairs, a cooler, and an open map weighted by a flashlight. No one around. Coffee still steaming in a tin mug. I took a cautious step closer and looked at the map. It was our trail system chart. Same version printed for public distribution. But the pen marks on it caught my eye. Someone had circled Whitetail Trail in red, tracing the route all the way to mile 18, where I'd started that morning, and then drawn an arrow pointing to a small handwritten note. STDONTWLE-FTER dark. I stared at it for a long time, the fire snapping softly beside me. My name wasn't written anywhere, but I didn't need it to be. Whoever made this plan knew exactly where I'd be. The woods had changed, just as the old rangers said they would. Not by magic, just by men. And night was coming fast. The fire hissed when a drop of mist hit the coals. I stood there, staring at the map on the stump, feeling the kind of quiet that has its own weight. The red pen marks looked deliberate. Clean lines, no tremor. Someone had taken their time drawing that route. I took a photo for documentation, folded the map, and slipped it into my pack. The coffee mug was still warm, maybe 15 minutes old. Whoever had been here was close. The forest around the camp stretched out in layers of gray. Every sound was muffled by the fog. No crickets, no frogs, just the occasional pop from the fire. I called out again. Forest Service! Identify yourself! Nothing. I circled the clearing, sweeping my flashlight along the tree line. Footprints led away from the camp toward the west. 2 sets, one heavier, one smaller. Maybe a woman or a teenager. They looked recent, the edges crisp. I debated whether to follow, but protocol said I should radio in first. I raised my mic. Station 12. This is Ranger Danner. I've located an unauthorized camp near Service Road 8, roughly half a mile north of mile 18. 2 individuals may still be in the area. Request confirmation. Static. Then a faint voice. Female, maybe dispatch, but buried under interference. Danner. Copy. Advise. The rest garbled. Say again, I asked. Only the hiss of the channel. I decided to log everything manually and head back toward the station on foot. The road would loop east for about 6 miles before cutting back to the ridge. Normally, that's a 2-hour hike. I could make it by 10 if I kept pace. I doused the fire with dirt, scattering the embers until they sizzled out. The smell of wet ash filled the air. When I straightened up, I caught a glint of metal near one of the chairs. A ranger badge. Old style, scratched, tarnished around the edges. Not one of ours. This design hadn't been issued since the late 80s. It had a name etched faintly across the bottom K. Hollis. I knew that name. Ranger Kenneth Hollis disappeared from Hargrave Forest in 1998. He'd gone out on a solo patrol after reports of poachers and never came back. The search teams found his truck, his radio, his pack, everything except him. I stared at the badge in my gloved hand, pulse hammering. There was no logical reason for it to be here, unless someone had found it and decided to use it for intimidation. Either way, I didn't want to stay. I pocketed the badge and started down the road. The fog clung thick, turning my flashlight beam into a white wall. I walked by memory and rhythm, counting steps, noting the slope underfoot. The trees on either side leaned close enough that their branches brushed my shoulders. Around the second mile, I heard it again, that soft tap, tap, tap. Same pattern as before, uneven and distant, like someone knocking on wood in slow motion. I froze, swinging the beam toward the sound. It came from deeper in the forest, maybe 50 yards away. "Who's there?" I called. No response. Just the echo of my voice swallowed by the mist. I tried again, louder.
"This area's closed."
Step out, then a single tap. Louder this time, and silence. I stayed still another 30 seconds, then forced myself forward. The noise followed once, then stopped completely. My mind ran through possibilities: woodpecker, branch snapping in wind, water dripping through hollow bark. All possible, all too faint to confirm. At 80:45, the fog began to lift in patches, revealing the outline of the ridge ahead. Relief came slow. The climb meant I was near the halfway point. I quickened my pace, keeping an ear out for engines or distant voices. Nothing. When I rounded a bend, I saw headlights. A truck sat parked on the shoulder. White Forest Service decals on the doors. My truck. I almost laughed from relief until I saw the driver's door standing open. I approached cautiously, hand on the bare spray. "Hello? Anyone here?" No answer. The interior light flickered weakly. My radio handset was gone from the dash mount, wires dangling. The ignition keys were still in, turned off. On the passenger seat lay my clipboard, its pages damp but intact. A few were missing, my route log among them. Footprints led from the truck into the trees on the opposite side of the road. Same pattern as before, one large, one smaller. I crouched to check the treads. Both matched the ones I'd seen at the campsite. They'd come here after me. I should have felt fear, but what I felt instead was something sharper. Professional clarity. Whoever they were, they'd been tracking me. Maybe they'd found the station earlier. Maybe they knew my schedule from posted patrol logs. If they'd meant harm, they could have waited at the truck. The fact that they hadn't suggested they wanted something else. I took the spare flashlight from the glove compartment, slung my pack tighter, and followed the prints. The trail cut uphill into dense cedar. The air smelled of resin and wet earth. My boots sank half an inch into the moss with each step. The prints were easy to follow at first, then vanished among fallen needles. I stopped to listen. Wind in the branches, faint creak noise somewhere below. Then, voices. 2 of them. I killed my flashlight and crouched low. The sound was faint, distorted by trees, but I could pick out tone. A man speaking in short bursts. Another voice replying softly. Higher pitch, maybe a woman or older teen. I couldn't make out words. I waited, heart pounding so hard it blurred the sound. A beam of light flicked briefly through the trees ahead, sweeping side to side. I dropped flat behind a log. The light passed, then cut off. I counted to 30, then eased forward. The voices had moved. I could hear brush crunching, footsteps receding. I followed in slow intervals until I saw their shapes through the trees. 2 figures, both in dark jackets. One carrying a lantern. They weren't hurrying, just moving steady, like people who knew exactly where they were going. They stopped near a clearing and began talking again. Louder this time. I heard one word clearly: station. I ducked behind a tree, straining to catch more. The man said, "Before dawn. Same route. No mistakes." The woman, or maybe a younger man, answered, "He's already out here." "We don't need to." The rest blurred under the wind. Then the lantern tilted, and I saw their faces for a fraction of a second. both unfamiliar, mid-30s. Ordinary, looking in the worst way. They turned and continued uphill, away from me. I waited until the light disappeared completely before standing. I debated calling out, but instinct said not to. Something about the calmness in their movements chilled me more than aggression would have. These weren't drunk campers or hunters. They were organized. I retreated quietly to the truck, every nerve buzzing. Once inside, I locked the doors, checked the fuel gauge, half a tank, and tried the ignition. The engine sputtered, then caught. I exhaled in relief. I flipped the headlights on and started down the road toward the station. The fog had lifted, but the forest still looked wrong. The trees threw long, narrow shadows across the gravel, twitching like wires when the wind hit. My radio remained dead, the signal light blinking red. I tried calling dispatch again. Nothing. As I drove, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. Every curve of the road looked the same, every turn familiar and foreign at once. I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed, though the mirrors showed nothing but my own taillights reflected on wet leaves. Halfway back, I saw another light through the trees, stationary this time, faint and orange, about a quarter mile off the road. I slowed. It was coming from roughly the direction of Station 12. For a moment, I thought maybe power had been restored. Maybe the backup generator had kicked in. But then the realization sank in, the light was moving. Flickering like torchlight, I parked at the turnout and killed the engine. The forest swallowed the noise instantly. I sat listening. No voices, no vehicles, just the low hum of night insects starting up again. I grabbed my flashlight and sidearm, stepped out, and began hiking toward the glow. The path narrowed through a tangle of ferns. My boots made soft squelching sounds in the damp earth. As I drew closer, the light split into two, lanterns swinging side by side. The same two figures, climbing the ridge toward the station. I hung back, keeping parallel with their route, watching through gaps in the trees. They reached the clearing below my cabin porch and stopped. One of them lifted their lantern, studying the building. Then the man pulled something from his jacket. A key. He inserted it into the front lock of Station 12 and turned. The door opened. I froze. That lock was supposed to be unique, coded for rangers only. The pair entered the cabin. The door closed softly behind them. I waited in the brush for what felt like an hour, though it was probably 10 minutes. No movement inside, no light through the windows, just stillness. Finally, I crept closer, keeping low. The truck keys weighed heavy in my pocket. I should have left, driven to the main gate, called for backup, but curiosity and duty wrestled inside me until I took one more step, then another until I reached the porch. The door stood ajar. Inside, I could see the faint shape of the lantern resting on my desk. Papers were spread across it, my daily logs, the same ones missing from my clipboard. The two figures were gone. The only sound came from the radio on the wall, crackling softly. Then a voice, clear, calm, male, came through. "Danner, this is Station 12. Do you copy?" My own call sign, my own voice replayed perfectly. I stood in the doorway, pulse drumming against my ribs. The radio hissed again. "Danner, this is Station 12. Do you copy?" It wasn't a recording, at least, not one I'd ever made. The pauses, the cadence, even the faint edge of exhaustion. It sounded live. I stepped inside, careful not to let the door creak. The lantern on my desk burned low, wick hissing. Papers fluttered in the draft from the open window. My logs were there, some pages dog-eared, others missing entirely. Beside them sat my field map, unfolded and marked with the same red pen lines I'd seen at the roadside camp. The radio crackled once more, then fell silent. I approached it slowly. The frequency knob had been shifted 2 clicks to the right from the standard patrol channel. I turned it back. Nothing but static. When I twisted it again, to the position it had been in. The voice returned, softer this time. East Ridge will move before dawn. Different speaker now. Male. Unfamiliar. My name wasn't mentioned, but something about the clipped rhythm sounded like command chatter. I recognized fragments, coordinates, phrases like drop sight and confirm delivery. Poachers didn't talk like that. Neither did hikers. I leaned closer, trying to isolate background noise. There was a faint metallic echo, like someone talking near a steel wall, maybe a truck or shipping container. Before I could adjust again, a floorboard groaned behind me. I spun around, flashlight raised. Nothing. The cabin looked exactly as I'd left it that morning, except for one detail. My gear locker, the one under the bunk, was unlatched. I crouched and lifted the lid. Inside, my spare boots and emergency flares were undisturbed, but the bolt-action rifle was gone. That jolted something deep in my gut. Whoever these people were, they weren't just trespassing. They were armed now. I backed toward the door, scanning the shadows. The forest outside was quiet, except for a low hum that I realized came from the generator shed behind the cabin. It shouldn't have been running. The fuel line had been empty for weeks. I crossed the porch and followed the sound. The shed's door hung open. Inside, the generator sputtered irregularly, lights on its panel blinking in random intervals. Someone had patched the fuel line with fresh tubing and a new filter. I knelt to inspect it and noticed muddy boot prints. 2 sets again, leading away from the shed toward the ridge trail. One boot had a nicked heel, just like the track I'd seen near the creek earlier. They were moving uphill, toward the fire tower. That tower hadn't been manned in years. It was used only for seasonal surveillance during lightning season. Its radio equipment disconnected, but it still had line of sight coverage across most of the forest. If they'd restored power there, they could transmit on ranger frequencies without HQ knowing. I slung my pack, checked my sidearm, and started climbing. The ridge trail was steep and narrow, the kind that forces you to use both hands in places. The fog had thinned, leaving the air sharp with pine and cold. Moonlight bled through the canopy in streaks. Every sound felt amplified. The scrape of gravel under my boots, the rasp of my breath, branches flexing overhead. Halfway up, I found a cigarette butt pressed into the soil, still faintly warm. I doused it with dirt and kept going. As the trees thinned, I caught sight of the tower silhouette, metal bones against the gray sky. A faint orange glow flickered from the cabin at the top. Someone was up there. I paused at the base to listen. A low mechanical hum vibrated through the frame. Generator power. Then came voices again, clearer now. Tower line secured, confirm frequency lock. We wait until the loop finishes, then move the rest. 2, maybe 3 people. I crept up the steps, keeping my weight to the sides of the treads to avoid noise. Each rung of the ladder felt slick with dew. My flashlight stayed off. The moon gave just enough light to see. When I reached the top platform, I could hear every word. "Copy the schedule?" a woman asked. "Yeah," the man replied. "He'll be out on the East Ridge until sunrise. Then we clear the station." My breath caught. Me. I edged close enough to peer through the open doorway. The interior glowed with a single lantern. 2 figures stood over the old desk, one flipping through my logbook, the other speaking into a handheld transceiver patched into the tower's radio. The third person, the one who'd taken my rifle, stood near the window, watching the tree line. Their backpacks were stacked in the corner, black nylon, military grade. On the desk, beside the radio, sat a small metal case, open and lined with padded foam. Inside was a hard drive enclosure, wires feeding into a laptop. Data scrolled across its screen. Satellite imagery, coordinates, timestamps. I couldn't grasp the full picture, but one word on the monitor made my stomach knot. Shipment. Not wildlife trafficking, something else. I shifted my stance, and the wood beneath me groaned. The man by the window turned instantly. Who's there? I ducked left as a flashlight beam cut through the door. My shoulder clipped the railing, sending a vibration down the frame.
Outside?
Someone shouted. I dropped flat against the outer platform, crawling under the lip of the decking as boots thundered above me. A flashlight swept over the stairs, searching. Could be an animal, one voice said. Animal doesn't wear boots, the other replied. A long silence followed. Then the sound of a bolt sliding, the rifle being chambered. I stayed frozen until the voices retreated inside. The hum of the generator masked my breathing. When I finally moved, it was toward the far side of the tower, away from the ladder. I climbed down the metal supports instead, fingers slipping on cold steel, until I reached the ground. Once there, I crouched in the shadows, thinking fast. If I went back to the station, they might already have backup there. If I stayed, I risked being spotted. The only advantage I had was familiarity with the terrain. There was one place I could go unseen, the old survey tunnel below Ridge Point. It was built decades ago for geological mapping and sealed after a collapse. But a narrow side entrance still opened into a dry chamber about half a mile long. From there, I could monitor the tower through the trees and maybe intercept their signal. I moved quickly, keeping the flashlight low. Every instinct screamed to call for help, but the radio remained dead on all frequencies. By the time I reached the tunnel entrance, sweat had soaked my shirt despite the cold. The opening was just as I remembered. A corrugated pipe half, buried under roots, barely wide enough to crawl through. I slipped inside and switched the flashlight to red beam. The tunnel smelled of rust and dust. My footsteps echoed in dull clanks. About 50 yards in, I found the old storage chamber where field gear used to be kept. Wooden crates, long empty, lined the walls. I sat on one, pulled out my notebook, and began writing everything down. The time, the names I'd overheard, the badge, the map. Documentation meant survival. 10 minutes passed before I heard engines. Multiple. I crawled to the mouth of the tunnel and peered out. Through the trees, faint headlights flickered. 2 vehicles, maybe 3, moving slowly along the ridge road toward the tower. The group had reinforcements. I listened as the engines stopped near the clearing. Doors slammed, voices carried. One shouted up to the tower. A flashlight blinked in response. Whatever operation this was, it was larger than 3 people. A minute later, the radio on my belt crackled again. No voice this time, just a faint repeating tone. I turned the volume down and recognized the patterned distress signal, 5 short beeps. But it wasn't coming from HQ. It was my call sign broadcasting it. They were using my ID. I flipped open the scanner function and triangulated the source. It pointed straight toward the tower. They were piggybacking the distress beacon on my frequency. Maybe to lure in responding rangers. Intercept them before they realized it was fake. That realization brought a chill heavier than fear. Because if they knew my code, they'd accessed HQ logs, which meant someone had given it to them. From the tunnel. I could see figures moving in the clearing now, unloading crates from the trucks, stacking them near the base of the tower. I zoomed my flashlight beam, just enough to glimpse the labels on one crate, U.S. Forest Service equipment storage. But the stenciled numbers beneath had been scratched out, replaced with new ones in black marker. I couldn't read them from this distance, but they didn't look like inventory codes. A smell reached me. Chemical, sharp and metallic. Fuel. They were filling barrels connecting hoses. Whatever this was, it involved more than theft. I ducked back into the tunnel, heart racing. My phone still had no service. But I remembered the old emergency satellite transmitter stored in a crate near the far end of the chamber. I'd stashed it years ago, thinking it was junk. If it still worked, I could send a ping to HQ's satellite uplink. I rummaged through the crates, hands shaking, until I found the metal case. Inside, the transmitter sat under a sheet of mildew-stained tarp. I flipped the switch, nothing. Dead, I opened the battery panel. Corroded terminals, but the backup lithium cell looked intact. I scraped the contacts with my knife, reseated it, and hit power again. This time, a faint green LED blinked to life. I keyed in the emergency code R12. Immediate assistance. The transmitter beeped, confirming signal lock. Then, from outside, a sound that made me freeze the whine of a drone. It rose above the trees, mechanical and steady. Its lights blinked red and blue as it circled the ridge. I killed my flashlight instantly. Through the tunnel mouth, I saw it hover near the tower, scanning the area. Then it turned directly toward me. The beam swept the slope, pausing on the tunnel entrance for half a heartbeat before passing on. My lungs burned from holding still. After a few seconds, the drone banked away and disappeared over the treetops. I exhaled and checked the transmitter. The LD still blinked, slow and steady. Help would come, eventually. But the woods were already changing again. Not by magic, but by men with purpose, moving in patterns I couldn't predict. I sat in the dark, listening to engines idle and voices murmur in the distance, realizing this night wasn't about surviving the forest. It was about surviving whatever was happening inside it. The tunnel walls seemed to breathe with me, each exhale bouncing back, damp and close. The green LED on the transmitter pulsed steady, one blink every 3 seconds. HQ should have received the signal by now. Should have. But should didn't mean much out here. Engines rumbled above the ridge, muffled but constant. The air trembled with them. I sat still for 10 minutes listening, mapping every sound, the thud of boots on wood, the metallic clank of tools, the low chatter of voices carried by the wind. Whoever these people were, they weren't panicking. They were working. When the rumble faded, replaced by silence broken only by the occasional gust, I crawled toward the tunnel mouth. The forest glowed faintly blue under moonlight. Through the trees, I saw the tower silhouetted against the sky. No lantern now, just the occasional flash of a headlamp. I needed eyes on what they were doing. I slung my pack and slipped out, moving in short bursts between trees. The ground was slick, the slope treacherous with moss. I took slow steps, keeping weight on my heels to avoid snapping twigs. As I neared the clearing, a gust shifted the branches, giving me a clear view of the trucks. 3 in total. 2 pickups, 1 larger box truck painted dull green with no markings. The back doors were open. Inside, rows of metal barrels glinted under flashlight beams. I recognized the smell before the wind even shifted. Diesel and something sharper. Solvent. A man climbed into the box truck, shouted to another below, "Get the last drum. They want the line finished before sunrise." Roger that. The woman I'd seen earlier stood by the tower base, scanning the tree line with my rifle slung over her shoulder. Every few seconds, she adjusted an earpiece and muttered something I couldn't hear. Coordination. Structure. Not random criminals. Then came a sound that cut through everything. Distant rotor blades. I froze. A helicopter. Faint, still miles off, but approaching fast. The men near the truck looked up, hands shielding their eyes. One shouted,
That's early!
The woman swore, barked orders.
Cut the lights!
Move the rig. Panic at last. I dropped flat behind a fallen log, heart pounding. The helicopter grew louder, wind pushing the treetops into a shiver. Its searchlight flicked on, sweeping broad arcs across the ridge. For the first time all night, I felt a flicker of hope. HQ must have received my distress ping. But as the beam passed over the clearing, the group didn't scatter. They formed a line, calm, coordinated, and raised something from the crates. Rifles, automatic, The helicopter's light froze on them for an instant, then cut off. The rotors veered hard, rising higher. Someone below fired. The crack split the night wide open. Then another. I clamped my hands over my ears. Muzzle flashes lit the clearing like strobe lights. The chopper banked sharply and disappeared behind the ridge, sound fading. The forest went dead silent. Then the woman's voice, steady again, clean up. 2 hours. They began hauling the crates back toward the trucks. I watched through the scope of my flashlight, half curiosity, half disbelief. The operation continued like nothing had happened. They weren't worried about the helicopter returning. That scared me more than the gunfire. Whoever they weren't afraid of being found. I retreated down the slope, careful not to draw attention. The tunnel wasn't safe anymore. The noise might have drawn someone to check it. I needed higher ground, somewhere with clear line of sight for when help came. The only option was the old fire overlook, a concrete platform built decades ago, now half collapsed but still reachable by a service path. From there, I could see the valley and part of the access road. If backup arrived, I'd spot their lights. The hike was brutal, ankle-deep mud, steep incline, cold biting through the jacket. My breath came in clouds that vanished instantly. Every rustle felt like pursuit, every shadow like a watcher. When I reached the overlook, the horizon had begun to pale, thin streaks of gray hinting at dawn. I crouched behind the low wall and unpacked the binoculars from my vest. The tower clearing sat maybe half a mile downslope, in the dim pre-dawn. I could make out the trucks parked close together now, headlights covered. The barrels had been loaded again. One man stood near the base, holding what looked like a detonator. I felt my mouth go dry. They weren't hauling fuel out. They were planting it. A controlled burn, illegal, unreported, and large enough to erase everything on this ridge. Whatever evidence existed, of them, their cargo, or whatever the helicopter saw, they meant to destroy it before sunrise. I gripped the radio mic and tried the emergency channel again. Station 12 to HQ urgent. Illegal operation at Whitetail Ridge. 3 vehicles. Multiple armed suspects preparing detonation. Repeat, multiple suspects. Request immediate support. Static hissed. Then, faintly, 12. Copy stand? The rest drowned in distortion. I tried again.
Say again, HQ!
I have visual on explosives being. The radio clicked dead. Power light off. I smacked the casing. No use. The battery had drained from constant scanning. Below, the figures began climbing into the trucks. The woman, the one with my rifle, gave a signal. 2 men climbed the tower ladder, carrying the metal case I'd seen earlier. Data. Whatever this was, they weren't destroying all of it. They were taking some with them. The first engine started, coughing diesel smoke. The sound rolled through the trees. I knew I couldn't stay on the overlook much longer. Daylight would expose me. I moved along the ridge, staying under cover. My mind ran through options: get to the service road, flag down the chopper if it circled back, or reach the river where my distress beacon could get a clearer uplink. Then I smelled the smoke. At first faint, then sharp. Chemical, oily. I turned. A thin plume rose from the base of the tower. Someone had lit the burn. It spread fast, licking through brush like liquid fire. Orange tongues climbed the trees, fed by the accelerant. Within minutes, the ridge glowed red beneath the fog. I ran. The trail twisted downhill, half eroded, littered with slick stones. Heat followed like a living thing, searing the back of my neck. My lungs screamed for air thick with smoke. When I reached the creek crossing, I paused to catch breath. The fire roared behind me, a wall of sound. Through the haze, I saw movement on the opposite bank. Figures again, 3 of them, heading the same direction I was. I ducked behind a boulder, watching. They didn't seem to notice me, focused instead on hauling gear down toward the river. Crates again. Smaller this time, metal, heavy. One of them stumbled and dropped his load. The lid popped open just long enough for me to see what was inside. Not explosives, not fuel, documents. Folders stamped with the Forest Service seal and government classification bands. Some old, yellowed with age. Some brand new. They were moving government files, smuggling them out under the cover of the fire. My brain snagged on that absurd reality even as the smoke thickened. Whatever operation this was, it went deeper than poaching or illegal logging. I waited until they were downstream before crossing the bridge. The wood sagged under my weight, charred embers drifting from the ridge above. On the far side, I found tire marks cutting through the mud toward the main service road, fresh ones leading east. I followed, crouching low, until the forest opened onto the wide gravel stretch that led toward the ranger gate. Morning light brushed the treetops now, pale and thin. The trucks would be visible soon, maybe even from the highway. That was my chance. I jogged down the road, staying in the ditch to avoid being silhouetted. The noise of engines ahead told me they hadn't gone far, probably stopped to offload or check damage. Then, in the distance, I saw flashing lights. Red and blue, low on the horizon. Relief surged. Law enforcement. Backup. I waved my flashlight,
Shouting, Forest Service! Ranger Danner! Over here!
The lights grew brighter, then stopped. No sirens. The vehicles that emerged weren't sheriff cruisers or Forest Service trucks. Black SUVs, windows tinted, moving slow. My relief bled into confusion, then dread. The lead SUV halted beside the first set of trucks. Men stepped out wearing dark tactical gear, no visible insignia. They didn't speak, just began unloading the crates from the pickups into their own vehicles. The woman with my rifle spoke to one of them briefly, handed him the metal case. He nodded, then pointed toward the burning ridge. They weren't arresting anyone. They were working together. I backed away slowly, my boots sinking into the mud. The forest around me flickered orange as the fire crept closer. Then a voice crackled over the radio clipped to one of their belts. Faint but clear enough for me to hear. Contain the blaze by 0700. No civilian witnesses. Something cold slid through my stomach. I turned and ran again, deeper into the trees, away from the road, until the smoke swallowed the horizon. By the time I stopped, my watch read 6:42 a.m. The light had shifted, morning gray bleeding into gold. The fire on the ridge still burned, but slower now. Somewhere above it, the helicopter circled again, distant but steady. I sat on a rock, coughing, throat raw. I'd documented everything, photos, notes, coordinates. But without my radio, I had no way to send it. If I went back, I'd vanish like Hollis. If I kept running, maybe I could make it to the old ranger station by the river. Abandoned, but with a landline that might still connect through the emergency grid. The air shimmered with heat and smoke. A crow flew overhead, wings cutting the quiet. For the first time, I realized how strange it felt to watch the forest burn and know it wasn't an accident. I pushed myself up, unsteady, and started downhill again. Behind me, the ridge roared. Ahead, the river whispered. Cold, constant, real. The woods hadn't changed after dark. They'd only revealed what had been hiding in daylight all along. Dawn came soft and gray, filtered through smoke that hung in veils over the valley. The fire had eaten its way halfway down the ridge. Each gust of wind carried the scent of scorched pine and burning plastic. Unnatural, synthetic. I moved through it in a half stagger, following the faint sound of water downhill. The river was my only map now. If I kept it on my left, I'd eventually reach the old Riverside station, closed since 2006 after flood damage. Last I knew, the emergency landline, they're still connected through the state grid, though half the building had collapsed. It was a long shot, but the only one I had. I kept my steps slow, deliberate, pausing every few minutes to listen. The forest was alive again, but not in the usual way. No birds, just the low rush of fire wind and the occasional crack of falling branches. When I stopped to catch my breath, I could hear the river clearer now, a deep, steady murmur. Halfway down, I saw tire tracks again, narrow, fresh, leading off a side path toward the valley. Someone else was heading the same direction I was. I dropped low and followed parallel through the trees. The tracks cut to a wide clearing near the water. From behind a fallen cedar, I saw the green box truck parked beside the shore. 2 men stood by the open back doors, unloading the last of the crates onto a small aluminum boat. The woman wasn't there this time. I watched, heart hammering, as one of the men adjusted an earpiece and said, "Copy that. She's clearing the ridge. Eat 40 minutes." The other replied, "We'll be gone by then." They were running out of time. So was I. I pulled out the camera from my pack, rugged model with night vision still on, and zoomed in. I got several shots: the truck's license plate, the crates, the faces. One of the men looked straight at my direction mid-frame, though I knew he couldn't have seen me from that distance. The kind of coincidence that makes your stomach twist. They pushed the last crate into the boat, tied off ropes, then one of them started the outboard engine with a cough of smoke. The other tossed in the rifles, climbed aboard, and pushed off into the current. The boat drifted slow at first, then accelerated downstream, swallowed by mist. That left the truck. If I could reach it before they came back, I might find paperwork, ID, something, anything. I waited 2 minutes after the boat disappeared, then sprinted low across the clearing. The truck engine was off, keys gone, but the driver's side door was unlocked. Inside smelled of fuel and metal. The glove box held nothing but a half-empty pack of gum and a laminated card with numbers that looked like coordinates. I snapped a photo and checked the back again. The crates left behind were empty, but something had spilled on the floor. Black soot mixed with oil. I dipped a finger in it. The texture wasn't fuel. Sticky, granular, like burnt plastic. In the corner, under a tarp, I found a satchel. Inside were loose papers, maps, printouts, a few manila folders stamped Environmental Impact Study, Hargrave Forest Sector B, dates recent. 2 weeks old. I skimmed one page and froze. Subsurface testing permit. Approved. Applicant Forest Infrastructure Assessment Division authorization, regional oversight, confidential clearance level 3 below. Handwritten notes, drilling access complete. Transfer data by nightfall. Clean traces. Whatever this was, it had federal signatures. The operation wasn't rogue. It was sanctioned. Just hidden. I stuffed the folders into my pack. Then, from upriver, came the faint whir of another engine. The sound was wrong, too small for a chopper, too constant for a boat. A drone again. I ducked under the truck and watched through the space between the wheels. The drone hovered low, scanning the clearing with a pulsing light. It paused near the truck bed, as if taking inventory, then turned toward the tree line. The beam swept within 10 feet of where I hid. I held my breath until my chest ached. After a few seconds, it rose higher and drifted back upriver, toward the ridge fire. I waited a full minute before crawling out. My pulse still drummed in my ears. The smoke had thinned, sunlight finally breaking through in pale stripes. I checked my compass, south by southwest, and started following the river again. Each step squelched through ash and mud. The first sight of the old station nearly undid me. It sat half collapsed on the opposite bank, its roof sagging under moss, windows blown out. The metal radio mast still stood beside it, tilting slightly but intact. I crossed the shallowest section of river, water up to my knees, and reached the porch. The door hung by a single hinge, swaying in the wind. Inside, the air smelled like mold and river silt. The landline sat on a desk in the far corner, tangled in spiderwebs. I brushed them aside, lifted the receiver, and pressed it to my ear, a dial tone. Weak crackling, but there. Relief hit so hard it almost made me laugh. I dialed the emergency extension directly to HQ. The line rang once, twice, then clicked. Hargrave Dispatch, this is Operator 4. Identify. This is Ranger Elias Danner. Station 12, I said fast. We've got unauthorized federal contractors or imposters operating on Whitetail Ridge, armed, possibly responsible for deliberate wildfire ignition. Coordinates incoming. Silence. Then, flatly, Danner, confirm your location. Riverside Station. I have evidence. Documents, photos. They're moving classified materials downstream. Send immediate. The line crackled sharply. A burst of static. Then the operator's voice changed tone. Lower, steadier, official in a way that drained warmth from the words. Ranger Danner, your position is logged. Remain where you are. Extraction will arrive shortly. That phrasing, extraction, sent a ripple of unease down my spine. Copy, I said slowly.
How long?
Stay inside. 10 minutes. The line went dead. I stared at the receiver, heartbeat uneven. Something about her tone felt wrong. Dispatch never said extraction. That was a military term. Outside, the wind shifted again, carrying a new sound engines. I moved to the window. 3 black SUVs appeared along the opposite riverbank, same kind I'd seen at the ridge. They stopped 50 yards upstream. Doors opened. Men stepped out, gear dark, no insignia. They'd found me faster than 10 minutes. I grabbed the folders and slung my pack. There was another exit, a rear window leading down to the storage crawlspace. I slid through, landing in knee-high weeds. The ground squelched under my boots as I crouched and crawled toward the waterline. The SUV's doors slammed. Voices shouted orders. 2 on the bridge. Check the structure. He's inside. I ducked lower, heart in my throat. The bridge was maybe 20 yards away. Rotted wood, but still passable. If they crossed, they'd see me instantly. I crept along the riverbank until I reached the foundation of the collapsed boathouse. From there, a narrow gap opened into the old maintenance culvert that ran under the property. I squeezed inside, pack scraping against stone. The air was cold, reeking of algae and rust. Footsteps echoed above. Nothing yet. Keep eyes open. Command wants him alive. Alive. That word rattled louder than it should have. Not arrested. Not detained. I crawled deeper into the culvert, following the faint draft of fresh air. It opened a few hundred feet downstream, concealed by reeds. When I emerged, the SUVs were still visible through the trees, men spreading out, radios buzzing softly. One of them paused, head tilted, scanning the riverbank. For a second, I thought he'd spotted me. Then he raised a hand to his earpiece. Copy that. He's not alone out here. Not alone. I ducked back into the reeds, pulse jumping. Who else were they talking about? The woman from before. Another ranger. Or someone trying to find me. A low roar drew my attention. Another helicopter, closer this time. Its paint shimmered dark gray. No markings, rotors chopping the smoke. Thick air. It descended toward the clearing beside the station. The men began hauling something from the SUVs. A stretcher, or maybe a containment gurney. That was enough. I backed away from the reeds, careful not to splash, and followed the river again. Every step now felt heavier. The night had been long, but daylight changed nothing. The forest didn't look safe in sun any more than it had under stars. After an hour of walking, I found a bend where the river widened into calm water. I sat on a rock, legs trembling, throat raw from smoke. I pulled out my camera and checked the images. The faces, the crates, the documents, all there. The last photo showed the truck near the river, one man staring straight toward the lens. Even zoomed in, his expression was unreadable, neither alarmed nor surprised. Just aware. I shut the camera off and stared across the water. The fire's smoke rose miles behind me now, blending with the morning clouds. The woods were quiet again. But it wasn't peace. It was the quiet after something irreversible. I didn't know who those men were, or what the real operation had been. I only knew the forest was being used for something it never consented to, its silence covering secrets no one would ever believe. The current tugged at my boots, cold and insistent. I stood, looked once more toward the ridge, and started walking downstream. The river curved wide through the pines, deepening into slate, gray water that moved without hurry. My reflection wobbled in it, face smeared with ash, eyes hollowed from no sleep. I kept walking along the bank until the sound of engines faded into distance and all that remained was the hush of moving current. It was just after 9. Sunlight had broken fully through, thin and white, diffused by smoke haze. Somewhere far behind me, the ridge still burned, a faint orange smudge on the horizon. I couldn't tell if that meant the fire was under control, or if it had simply burned past anything left to consume. My goal was Station 9, 15 miles downstream. It hadn't been staffed in years, but it sat close enough to the state highway that I might intercept a ranger patrol, or even flag down a logging truck. It was a long shot, but I couldn't stay out here. I walked for nearly an hour, keeping to tree cover. Each time the wind shifted, I stopped and listened. The forest had gone eerily normal again. Bird calls returning, insects buzzing through the smoke. If someone found this place tomorrow, they'd see blackened ridges and think it was just wildfire damage. They'd never know what had burned first. My radio still lay clipped to my shoulder strap, silent and dead. I hadn't turned it back on since Riverside. I didn't trust which voice might come through. By the second hour, fatigue hit like gravity. My steps slowed. I stopped to drink from the river, refilled my canteen, then sat against a fallen log. My hands shook when I tried to open a protein bar. I kept seeing that woman's face, the calm precision in her eyes as she'd lifted the rifle. Not anger, not panic, just procedure. I'd been trained to read intent in body language. Her said duty. That made everything worse. Around 11, I heard voices again. Faint, up the bank ahead. I dropped low and crawled toward the sound. Through the underbrush, I saw 2 men standing beside a parked ATV. Both wore ranger uniforms. Patches, hats, the whole look. For a heartbeat, I thought it was over, that they'd found me. Then I noticed their boots black tactical, not standard issue. I stayed hidden. One of them, older, spoke into a handheld. Negative visual on subject. Proceeding east perimeter sweep. The other scanned the tree line, sunglasses reflecting the water. You think he's still breathing? Doesn't matter, the older one said. Orders were to recover the material, not the man. Material. My stomach went cold. When they climbed back onto the ATV and started downriver, I waited until the sound faded before standing. My body ached from crouching. I checked the pack. Still had the folders. Still had the camera. My only proof, fragile as paper and battery life. They'd turned the ranger uniform into camouflage. I headed the opposite direction, cross-country through denser trees. The forest thickened quickly, undergrowth rising waist-high. Somewhere nearby, a woodpecker hammered, the rhythmic tapping echoing like distant gunfire. After another hour, I reached a logging road, overgrown but intact. Tracks in the dirt showed fresh treads, too narrow for heavy machinery, maybe ATVs again. I followed cautiously, using the brush as cover. The road led to an old service lot. The sign was rusted, half buried in weeds. Harjare VCCSTORB, Testicis, same phrase I'd seen on the documents. A chain link fence stood behind the sign, padlock broken. Beyond it stretched a clearing of disturbed soil, maybe 50 yards across. The ground was studded with metal posts, capped with sensors and tiny cameras. In the center, a rectangular patch of earth had collapsed inward like a sinkhole. I stepped closer. The hole wasn't deep, maybe 10 feet, but its sides were too smooth to be natural. Reinforced concrete lined the walls, leading into a tunnel mouth half, covered by debris. A man-made shaft. I crouched near the edge and felt faint air movement from below. Cool, dry, mechanical. Something was still running down there. I thought of the phrase in the report, subsurface testing. Whatever they'd been doing, it hadn't ended with the fire. A noise snapped behind me, gravel shifting under a boot. I spun, flashlight up. A man stood by the fence, hands raised to show they were empty. He wore the brown jacket of an off-duty ranger, beard streaked with gray, eyes red from smoke. "Easy," he said. "You Danner." The name hit like an electric shock. "Who are you?" "Name's Pollard. Maintenance Division, Station 9. They sent a call about a missing ranger."
You?
My mind tripped over itself. Who sent it? "Dispatch out of Helena?" he said. "Said you went off, Grid. I've been out here since dawn trying to get through the fire lines. You all right?" His voice was tired, steady. Real? I wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. I lowered the flashlight but didn't pocket it. "You're sure you're from Station 9? He nodded toward the patch on his sleeve. "We barely get budget to fix toilets. But yeah, that's me." I studied him a moment longer, then stepped aside so he could see the shaft. "You know what this is?" Pollard frowned. "Hell of a hole. Not on any of our maps." He crouched, picked up a fragment of the concrete lining, turned it over in his hand. "You report this." I tried. "Lines went bad. There's been a whole crew out here. Unmarked vehicles, armed. Set the ridge on fire." He looked up sharply. "You're serious. Dead serious. They're moving government crates, burning evidence. You didn't see any convoys on your way in?" "Just smoke," he said quietly, "and one chopper heading south." I watched his face, trying to read anything false in it. Nothing. Just exhaustion. He stood, brushed dirt from his hands. "If you've got proof, we should get it to HQ. I've got a working radio in my truck up the road." I hesitated. "Show me." He gestured for me to follow. We walked back through the brush to a dusty maintenance pickup parked behind a berm. The logo on the door was real, paint faded from age. Inside, the radio hummed with a weak carrier tone. Pollard climbed in, keyed the mic. "Station 9, this is Pollard, East Sector. Found the missing ranger. Copy." A crackle. Then a voice. "Copy, Pollard. Confirm Danner is with you." He looked at me, nodded. "Affirmative. Stand by for instructions." The line went dead. We waited. 10 seconds. 20. Then a new voice came through, low and calm. Not the same operator as before. "Pollard, you are to bring Ranger Danner to the junction at Route 2 immediately. A team will meet you there." Pollard frowned. "Understood. Who's the contact?" "Command liaison," the voice said. "Just bring him in." The channel clicked off. Pollard glanced at me. "That sound right to you?" I shook my head. "No, there is no command liaison. That's not forest protocol." He exhaled through his nose. "That's what I thought." We sat in silence a moment. The woods were still except for the faint buzz of the radio static. Finally, he said, "You've got your own ride. My truck's gone." He nodded. "Then we make this easy. We go my way, but not to 42. There's a ranger fire shelter 10 miles north. No one uses it. You can send whatever you've got from there through the backup satellite. After that, we'll figure out who's real and who's not." I hesitated only a second before nodding. We drove in silence for nearly 30 minutes. The forest passed by in slow, endless repetition. Charred trunks, patches of untouched green, ash drifting like dust. Pollard kept his eyes on the road. "You know," he said after a while, "I was stationed here back when Hollis went missing." The name jolted me. "You knew him?"
He nodded. "Good man."
"Careful, thorough. They said he wandered off during a poacher sweep." I never bought it. "He didn't wander," I said quietly. I found his badge last night. Pollard gripped the wheel tighter, jaw working. Then we're right to be careful. We passed a burned-out sign for Sector A. The sky had turned a strange copper color. Sunlight diffused through lingering smoke. Somewhere to the west, thunder rolled faintly. Not a storm. More like the dull percussion of distant detonations. By early afternoon, we reached a narrow turnoff marked by a faded fire emblem. Pollard parked beside a collapsed picnic shelter. The ground here was soft, blanketed with pine needles. He pointed to a narrow path leading downhill. Shelter's through there. Go start the generator. I'll grab the emergency logbook. I climbed out, shoulders aching from tension. The path wound tight between trees before opening into a small clearing where a steel door was set into the hillside. I tugged the handle, stiff but functional, and stepped inside. The interior smelled of oil and dust. Old cots lined the wall. A generator sat in the corner, its tank half full. I pulled the cord twice before it caught, rumbling to life. Lights flickered overhead. As I turned to call for Pollard, something glinted on the floor. Metal, half buried in dirt. I knelt and brushed it off. Another badge. K. Hollis. The same one I'd pocketed the night before. But this one was clean, untarnished, as if it had been placed there. The hairs on my neck stood up. Pollard, I called. No answer. I stepped outside. His truck still sat where we'd left it, door open, engine idling. But Pollard was gone. The woods around the clearing were silent again. The silence was the kind that rearranged itself. First thick, then thinner, then too thin, like air stretched too far. Pollard's voice should have been close. He couldn't have gone more than 20 yards. Yet the woods sounded hollow, the kind of empty that hides its reason. I called again. Pollard! Nothing. The engine idled low, steady as breath. I stepped toward the truck, scanning the tree line. His footprints still marked the dirt, clear from the cab to the path, but they stopped at the edge of the clearing. No turn, no drag, no return. Just ended. I told myself he'd gone to scout the area, that he'd come back, that this wasn't the same pattern I'd seen in Hollis's old disappearance reports. Then I saw movement behind the windshield. The passenger door was half open, swaying. On the seat lay Pollard's Ranger hat, the brim damp with sweat. Under it, his radio. Its indicator light blinked green, connected to an active channel. I picked it up. Static for a moment, then a voice, flat-clipped. Unit 9, report location. I stayed silent. The voice repeated sharper. Pollard, confirm. I pressed the transmit key anyway. Pollard stepped out. Who am I speaking with? A pause. Then, calm as a field report. Danner, we have your coordinates. My stomach clenched. You're trespassing in an active federal recovery zone. Stand by for collection. The line clicked dead. Collection, not rescue. I tossed the radio into the brush and sprinted back to the shelter. The generator still throbbed in the corner, echoing off the steel walls. The badge on the floor caught the light again, and for the first time I noticed something, scratched into the metal along its edge. Tiny letters, barely visible. 60RB2NNEL2. I remembered the collapsed shaft on the test site. The same mark had been stenciled there, faint under suit. I shoved the badge into my pocket and started tearing through the shelter for supplies, water, maps, anything. In a cabinet I found an old flare gun, half a pack of road flares, and a folded survey chart from the 1980s. Faded, but still legible. 2 tunnel networks marked in pencil, both under Sector B. I circled the one closest to me. It ran parallel to the river, ending near the highway junction at Route 42. The very spot the voice had told Pollard to drive me to. Maybe it wasn't just an ambush point. Maybe it was an access route, an exit. I packed what I could and shut the generator off. The silence that followed rang in my ears. Outside, the air had changed. Birds gone again. Distant hum returning. Engines, I slipped into the trees before the first SUV appeared. 3 of them, same matte black, moving slow. The lead vehicle stopped by the fire shelter. Doors opened, boots hitting dirt. I crouched low behind a stump, watching through the gaps. One man knelt by the steel door, checked the lock, then nodded to another who carried a portable scanner. "He was here," the first said. "Generators warm. Command wants visual confirmation before containment." The other replied, "Containment? They fanned out. 2 moving up the slope, 1 staying by the truck. Their weapons weren't drawn, but slung ready. Everything about them radiated training, purpose." I eased backward, 1 slow step at a time, till the trees swallowed me. Once out of sight, I started down the ridge toward the sound of water. The plan was crude: follow the old survey line toward the highway, stay off trails, and find someone who didn't speak in code. I moved fast but careful, counting steps between each breath. A half-mile in, I stopped to listen. Nothing but the faint whir of drones above. I looked up, saw a single red light drifting between clouds. They'd released trackers. The woods no longer felt like woods. Every tree trunk seemed placed, every path designed to funnel me somewhere. I forced myself to keep focus, orient by the river, not by instinct. Instinct had led Hollis to trust whoever called him out here. The badge in my pocket felt heavy now, edges cutting against my thigh. By early afternoon, the ground leveled into a rocky corridor hemmed by cedar. The air turned colder, the sunlight dimmer. And then, ahead, I saw it, another concrete shaft, half buried, its rusted door hanging crooked. Tunnel 2. I hesitated only long enough to scan the ridge behind me. No movement. Then I ducked inside. The tunnel descended steeply, lined with old wiring and pipes. My flashlight beam caught faded warnings painted along the wall. Authorized personnel only. Hazardous gas. The deeper I went, the stronger the air currents felt, pushing outward, as if some ventilation system still worked below. After 100 yards, the passage opened into a wide chamber. Rows of storage lockers lined one side, most broken. On the far wall, a metal door stood ajar. Faint light leaked from within. I crept closer and peeked through. Inside was a small control room. Outdated monitors, dust-coated panels. But one screen was still active, flickering between camera feeds, forest roads, the burned ridge, the tower site. Another showed the river, my path, from above. A live surveillance grid. I stepped inside, hands shaking. The control console hummed, connected by thick cables leading into the wall. I scanned for any label or network ID. The nameplate read Hargrave Remote Operations Decommission 2003, except it clearly wasn't. I found a terminal keyboard under a pile of debris and tapped a few keys. The monitor stuttered, loaded a text prompt. Lines of code scrolled, ending with one word, Transficum PE. Whatever data they'd taken last night, it had been uploaded from here. A folder list flashed briefly before the system locked. Surface survey, geothermal logs, personnel review Hollis, K, and then a file titled Containment Protocols 1998. I didn't have time to read. A distant clang echoed down the tunnel. Voices followed. I killed the monitor and ducked behind the lockers, just as flashlight beams cut through the doorway. "Power signatures, Lev," someone said. "He's inside." Boots crunched closer. I could see their silhouettes. 2 of them this time, rifles slung forward. I held my breath as one swept the light over the consoles. "Looks like he accessed the system." "Doesn't matter," the other replied. "The data's backed up. Just make sure he doesn't walk out." The beam swung toward the lockers. I pressed flat against the cold metal, pulse hammering. The first man stopped inches from my hiding spot. I could smell the smoke on his jacket, hear the leather creak. He hesitated, then turned away. They moved deeper into the room. I slipped sideways, crouched low, and bolted for the door. "Contact!" one shouted. Gunfire cracked, deafening in the confined space. Sparks flew as rounds hit the concrete. I sprinted down the tunnel, light jerking wildly. The echoes disoriented me. It felt like the shots came from every direction. I reached the surface hatch gasping. Sunlight stabbed my eyes. Behind me, the tunnel thundered with another explosion. Not from gunfire this time, but from deep inside. A controlled detonation. Dust and smoke belched out the entrance, knocking me sideways. When I lifted my head, the whole slope was collapsing inward, sealing the shaft. They'd destroyed the site. I stumbled away, coughing, until I reached the tree line. The ridge behind me sagged, smoke curling from the new crater. No one followed. The forest looked wrong again. Too still, too composed, like it had reset itself. I walked for hours. Eventually the trees thinned, replaced by power lines and gravel road. Civilization's edge. A service sign read Route 42, 3 miles. I stopped there, sat on the guardrail, watched the clouds move. My clothes smelled of metal and burnt resin. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. By dusk, headlights appeared on the road. A county sheriff cruiser marked and real this time. I stepped out waving. The deputy rolled down his window, face tired and blank. "You from the fire crew?" he asked. "Forest Service," I said hoarsely. "Station 12. He frowned. "Thought they closed that one last year." I didn't answer. He glanced at the ridge, smoke rising in the distance. "Whole sectors shut down till containment clears. You're lucky to be alive." I nodded, unable to find words. He gave me water, drove me back toward town. From the rear seat, I looked out the window as the forest rolled past, dark shapes in the fading light. Somewhere in there, beneath the new scars of burned earth, were the tunnels, the files, the names that didn't want to be remembered. At the station they took my report, polite but distracted. One officer wrote down what I said without expression, asked me to repeat dates, names. When I mentioned unmarked SUVs, his pen paused only once. "Any photos?" I handed him the camera. He flipped through the images slowly, jaw tightening, then passed it to another officer. They whispered briefly. Then he returned the device to me. "These are corrupted. You might have dropped it in the fire." The screen still showed my pictures when I looked later, but every file was black. They let me go before midnight. No escort, no debrief. Just a tired handshake and a line about filing supplementary evidence when I was ready. I drove back toward the ridge in my replacement truck. At the overlook, wind pushed through the pines, carrying the smell of new ash. The forest was quiet again. Somewhere below, under a mile of burned soil, lay the last of whatever they'd buried in Hargrave Hollis. Pollard, maybe me eventually. I sat there until the stars came out. When I left, I locked the station door behind me and nailed a sign to the post, TRILCLOCD, Hazar DRE. Sometimes the truth isn't hidden. It's erased. And the woods don't change after dark. We just start to see what daylight refused to show.